County Council meeting. I can't introduce the Reverend Coleridge today because he's on holiday, so I'm afraid you'll have the Reverend Osborne for a few seconds today. For those not wishing to stay for prayers, if they want to leave the chamber now, otherwise could you please stand for a few seconds. Right, Lord, could you help us to make good, sensible, proper decisions for the people of Northamptonshire? Please help us. Thank you, Lord. Amen. Right, apologies for those people that are not here. First of all, it would be for people that are not here. First of all, Councillor Patel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Parker and Lowman are away on a pension conference. Councillor Legge and Auger are representing NCC at the joint West Northamptonshire steering group. I also got an apology from Councillor Rumans, Councillor Walker, Scott Edwards, Rob Goff, Pinda Chauhan, Rebecca Breeze, Robin Brown, Mike Hallam, and Victoria Perry. Otherwise, the rest of them are here.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair. As you can tell, I'm not Councillor Scott sitting here. Councillor Scott is indeed at the Pensions Committee with the LGSS, so his apologies. Councillor Brookfield, Councillor Ailson, Councillor Strachan too.
Thank you. Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, all of the Liberal Democrat group have managed to drag themselves along today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stamborough. Next, declarations of interest. Oh, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor James Hickwell is not able to be here today.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for not calling the independents. I do beg your pardon. Now we'll go to declarations of interest. I'm sure you're all aware how serious not declaring interests are.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, can I ask for guidance from the monitoring officer on the declaration of interest in respect to the main substantive motion today? A number of us are dual hatters, and we've either voted or are about to vote in our sovereign councils. The only difference with myself is that over the last 12 months I have helped shape the structural change orders that we're discussing today.
I think, Councillor Griffiths, that unless your voting intention here today is to go wildly away from what has been developed that you've been involved in, I don't see that you have a conflict today.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
Thank you. Again, going back to declarations of interest, I'm sure you're all aware of the seriousness of not declaring interest, and if you wish to do so during the meeting, please raise your hand and I'll take your interest straight away. Chairman's announcement. It is with pleasure that we welcome Annabelle de Capel-Brook for her first meeting. Congratulations on your election win, and I'm sure you'll enjoy yourself here like the rest of us do regularly. Next we come to item 6 and item 6A.
No,
Sorry?
5A. Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Hold on, Chair.
I beg your pardon, we've got two different pieces of paper with different numbers on it, it's all right. So we're on item 5A now, the draft structural change order. Councillor Galway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to propose an alteration under Rule 15.8 of the Rules of Procedure. And I will propose this and somebody will second it, and then I understand Council will hopefully agree to it. So it goes as follows. Since the publication of the papers, further information has been received regarding the proposed cost of delivering the unitary programme. Northamptonshire County Council has serious concerns about these figures, and until there has been robust scrutiny of the figures, that the County Council resolves not to agree to any further expenditure on the unitary delivery programme, as it may have serious implications on the deliverability of the 2019-2020 budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, please to second that.
Thank you. Council agree? Right, thank you. And now we go to item 5B. No, we don't. We now debate.
We ask the leader to propose his amended, his altered paper.
Yes, we do. I'm sorry, it's a bit more complicated. We ask you to propose the amended, altered papers. Thank you. Councillor Goldwyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we all know, this has been a challenging and very interesting time in local government in Northamptonshire. Before us today, paper 5A is the draft structural change order, and it's asking us to agree with the recommendations as is laid out. I'm sure all members are aware, but basically the process goes as follows, that we're awaiting the Secretary of State's decision, which we're expecting in March, or that's when we've been told we should expect it, and if he is minded to approve the submission after the consultations that have happened, an order will be laid in Parliament, probably in the summer, providing there's the necessary parliamentary time, and that will involve this structural change order. Now, it's up to us as councils, and many of us are twin hatters, and these papers have been through, I think, all of the other councils in the county, but it's up to us to put in this submission through this paper that we agree with many of the contents of what the government will put in their order, because it's within their gift to lay the order and put in as they so decide. But if you look at the rear of the report, it splits down the north preferences for what we see and what's been agreed at the steering groups that have been meeting for a number of months now. And then, of course, for the west, there are some slight differences in both of those, but basically the order covers things like the form of unitary council, whether it's district with county powers, which basically alludes to the electoral cycle, the form of governance for the shadow authority, the number of votes for twin hatters, all this has been discussed, number of councillors for the first election, so it's up to us to suggest the number of councillors, and we've agreed that we would look to put in 3 per existing Northamptonshire County Council ward, which about works out about on the national average of how members represent the population in their wards. The composition of the shadow executive, which has been debated widely and has been covered in the media in terms of what has been agreed, and we know the story of things have changed, but we've agreed that we're recommending that, although we would prefer a greater representation on these committees, given the spend and the percentage of the services that will be forming the new unitary authorities, we are agreeing with the numbers that have been previously agreed. So for the north, it's 3 from the Borough Council of Wellingborough, 3 from Corby Borough Council, 3 from East Northamptonshire Council, 3 from Kettering Borough Council, and 3 from Northamptonshire County Council, although we would prefer a greater amount of members than 3. We have put that in the paper, but that's what we're recommended to council. So who will be responsible convening the first meeting? It's the Corby Chief Executive. Do we want an order under Section 24, which is basically a very key component of the structural change order, and we're recommending that we do not sign up to the Section 24 order, and that has a massive implication on us in terms of authorising expenditure. Now, we know that some of our social care emergency packages can amount to a significant amount of money, so we need that flexibility to be able to keep autonomy and sovereignty of our own finances, given this time last week we were talking about the budget. Yes, we've made significant progress in dealing with the budgets, but, you know, words like fragile and, you know, when we consider where we are with children's services, we've got to be extremely cautious on how we proceed, which is one of the reasons why we've put the alteration in, that we've got to make sure that the finances are not adversely affecting the services and the deliverability of everything we've worked really, really hard to get to and achieve over the last 12 months. So that's the summary for the north. In the west, I'll just pick that up. Okay, we've a slightly different agreement in terms of the representation, in that there's 4 seats from Daventry, 4 seats from Northampton Borough, 4 seats from South Northamptonshire.
I'm going to have to ask you to wind up, Councillor
Okay,
Dolby.
and 6 seats on Northamptonshire County Council. I would ask, given that this is a hugely important topic, Mr. Chairman, I'm given a couple more minutes if that's okay. But it basically runs down the similar things that are looked to be going into the statutory change order. And again, as I said, it's up to us to put that forward, and it's within government's gift to shape that. So,
excuse me 1 second. I'm going to let him carry on.
And if I could just refer back to my points made at the beginning around the alteration, we had a presentation last week as a group of leaders. It is proposals, it hasn't been agreed to, but there were some serious concerns about the numbers involved there. We're representing our communities, the public of Northamptonshire. We've got to be asking the questions, is this good value for the residents that we represent? And we wouldn't be doing our job properly if we're not asking the right questions, and we've got to get some scrutiny over those figures. So this has been an interesting journey to get to this point. We are committed to the unitary journey, and I recommend the paper to Council, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Right. Yes, I can hear myself now. Do apologise about that. The headphones went wrong. Do we have a seconder?
Thank you, Chair. Nearly had 2 seconders then. You all heard the budget last week, and I'm going to second this proposal, but I'm only going to second it on the basis of the amendment that's gone through, because we've come too far now. The commissioners and the staff have put great efforts into getting our numbers back on track, and until I'm satisfied that it does not impact this our budget, then I wouldn't agree entirely. So I thoroughly recommend the amendment, but in principle, alteration, sorry, I stand corrected, but I will second the principle. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longley. Right, we've got speakers. Councillor McGee.
Thank you, Chair, and I hope you have the same patience with the rest of us when we speak on this important issue. As you can tell, we in Corby do not support unitary, and I think the open consultation agreed with that. But what we do believe is that there are many benefits to working together currently and in the future. We don't have to be a unitary to do that, and I've always said that from the beginning. But unfortunately, the unitary proposals will go ahead, but I believe 2020 is far too early and there is too many risks to do that. And even one or two of these risks, such as the pressure on staff, the pressure on service disruption, it's a great risk. So it's far too early to get in that timescale. And I'm sure we all agree that. Chair, we are still waiting on the Children's Commissioner report that's coming out and telling us about children's services, where it is now, and about transformation of that. That is a very good reason to hang on. Chair, I think everybody in here would agree that there is an extension needed if we're going to have an achievable and a successful reorganisation. So we can't have this steamrolled through by central government or by anyone else. Because it's also true to say, Chair, that the possibility of a Brexit referendum or a snap general election will take attention away from Northamptonshire. And that's a reality, whether we like it or not. So, Chair, if we were all honest with ourselves, we know that we should actually be writing to the Secretary of State and asking for this, as Corby has already did, and say we have to relook at this timescale. If you're forcing it on this council and in this beautiful shire of ours, we need more time to do this. And indeed, within that more time, we should have a proper boundary review. I'm sure most of us could agree that too. So let's not rush at this, Chair. Let's agree together that we have to ask for more time. I'd rather it didn't happen, but it's going to happen whether I like it or not. And I've got to get used to that and stop being so angry about the mess that we're in and have more input into how we go forward with that. But, Chair, what I will agree with is the amendment. To spend another £14 million when we are struggling, it's absolutely horrendous. We're already spending far too much to make this happen. So it makes absolute sense that we have a very, very close look at the finances going forward to help this happen. So please have a look and agree.
Can you wind up, please?
Certainly will, Mr. Chairman. Have a look and agree that we need more time, and let's jointly put another letter to the Secretary of State and ask for that. And then we can make sure there is less disruption to the vulnerable people, the children and the adults in social care that needs it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. It's very unusual that I stand to speak and agree with Councillor McGee. I think it may be close to a first. It's happened once before, I think, but that's about it. Most of what Councillor McGee said, I agree with. But I'll go a bit further. I was at the presentation where these new figures were produced, and the thing that really stunned me was that, well, two things. First of all, most of them were red rated, which means that as far as I'm concerned, you're unlikely to achieve that increase of 14 million, even with that description, which was very sparse and inadequate. It's likely to be considerably more than that. Second point was that I noticed several items of expenditure which weren't included in that. It was very difficult to spot it because they flew through the slides so fast and there was insufficient explanation. That's why the change to the motion asked for additional scrutiny, because I do not believe that the figures that are currently being put forward include all of the likely expenditure that is going to be incurred as a result of going unitary. It needs a thorough investigation, which once again brings us to in a circle back to the original problem, the timing. This is all being done with considerable haste, much more quickly than elsewhere, and as a result, some of the scrutiny is being compressed or even squeezed out. And when I look at those figures and the supporting documentation, I get very uncomfortable. And the final point I'll make is that if this impacts upon the County Council's budget, then the Secretary of State's direction comes into force. We cannot amend our budget without the approval of the commissioners, and they are required to approve our budgets. I don't see a reference to the commissioners in this structural change order. I see problems downstream.
Thank you, Councillor Mercer. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues in this chamber will be aware that Northampton Town, the Labour group in Northampton and the residents of Northampton have never ever agreed with the proposals in front of us. People in Northampton wanted and still want a unitary Northampton. I am really, really disturbed by the lack of democracy around this whole project. I think the consultation was facile, it wasn't good enough, the timings weren't good enough, the costings have proved to be a variable feast and completely unsatisfactory. We know that the timescales are slipping because the government is preoccupied over Brexit and other things. It is a completely unsatisfactory situation to be in. All of us want the very, very best outcomes for the most vulnerable in our communities. This is not the way to deliver on that. I think the lack of openness around the last county elections is just amazing. It means the result was a flawed result, in my view. And I think from where I'm standing, and because of the people that I serve in both my borough ward and my county division, I can say that living in a one-party state is not good. It isn't good. It's not producing good outcomes for vulnerable children, vulnerable adults, and it's not good for democracy. We need a much more robust kind of politics than we inhabit at the moment. I think this is completely unsatisfactory. You will also be aware that South Northampton and Daventry do not want to be part of a unitary with Northampton. They want their own rural unitary. I think it's absolutely right to ask for a pause to be put on this process so that more work can be done and we can achieve much better outcomes from the people that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scrimshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whether or not this is passed and these details are sent off to government, I just want to put it on record that I absolutely too share the concerns about the timescales involved. Having to move so quickly to early part of next year, I think is just unrealistic. Where unitary has worked in other parts of the countries, that has been because locally that's what people wanted. They haven't had it imposed upon them. And therefore, those councils took a long time reaching the decision that they actually wanted to progress to unitary. This gave them a time to do a lot of preparation work, which we are not going to have the opportunity to do here. It is going to be rushed, and I think that's a real concern. So I too, like John McGee, would like, whether or not this is passed or not, maybe a covering letter to be sent with this to the Secretary of State, just to suggest that, you know, locally there are concerns about those timescales, because I think it's something that he does need to consider when making his final decision. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to come back to what Councillor Danielle Stone said. She says the Labour and the residents of Northampton, we all represent our residents, and I have a deep problem when somebody tries to put the residents all with their groups. We are a group and we represent our residents, not just the Labour group. Thank you so much.
Saying a bit, we haven't. You wish to speak?
Yes, I know about microphones. And indeed, press the button. Thank you very much for calling me, Chair. Right, so I have to say I agree with the concerns that have been raised about the timescale. But if there are concerns about the timescale, it's because the Minister is dragging his feet making a decision. You know, these claims about, oh, Brexit, oh, it's taking up all our time, we can't possibly do anything else, are complete rubbish. You know, we could have been a lot further on the process if the Minister wasn't dragging his feet. So if we're going to write to the government, we should express the concerns, and let's hope the Minister gets the message one way or another. I also agree absolutely that seeing as this so-called extra cost of £14 million has emerged in the last couple of days, that we should support a pause in the spending on this so that we can scrutinise those figures. It's interesting that the person responsible for producing this extra cost appears to be someone that not many of us in here have ever heard of before. Nobody really knows who he is or who he works for or what his remit is or anything. So it would be useful to have some information on that. And on that subject, it would be useful to be kept better informed about this process, full stop. You know, some members in this room may have been being briefed regularly about what's been going on as regards local government reorganisation and the new unitaries in Northamptonshire. But I can assure you, not all members in this room have been briefed regularly. Some members may have been briefed because they're members of other councils who have done a better job of briefing their membership. And I'm sure that they are better informed for that. So perhaps we could do that in the future. There are a couple of things in this document that need some clarification. I won't rehearse what's gone before. The process has been, I think, not as good as it could have been, shall we say. But a couple of things in the document that need some clarification. Apparently, it's proposed that any by-elections that might arise, the steering group's preference should be that they should not be held. I would much rather see the 6-month rule applied for those. But, you know, if that's the steering group's preference, so be it. I'm not really sure who the steering group are. Don't really know what their processes have been. If you do some detective work, you can find out who the steering group members are, but it's not the easiest thing to do. So that's certainly something that we need to clarify. A couple of other things in the documents at Appendix 1 and 2. I think elsewhere it's at least alluded to the fact that it would be good if the two unitaries were on the same electoral cycle, yet the two documents express a preference for different electoral cycles. That may work fine, that may cause problems across the county. One of them talks about overview and scrutiny, the other one doesn't. And in the document for the West, it talks about Northamptonshire County Council having 6 seats on the shadow authority, yet in the report about the West, it refers clearly to Northamptonshire County Council only having 4 seats on the shadow authority. So one of those documents is wrong. And if it's the one that's being sent to the government, I suggest it needs to be amended so it reflects the report that we're going to decide upon later. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine is just a short comment that I actually too agree with Councillor McGee. Our children's services, as we know, are in a vulnerable position. We are awaiting a report from our Children's Commissioner to lay out what his view and recommendation is for the way forward for our children's services. And I think at this situation, we need to concentrate on looking after the vulnerable people in our county and not worrying about all these other things. And I agree with the amendment fully, but we do need to look into this and wait for these things to happen. It's all happening too quickly.
Right, that is definitely all for speakers now. Right, we are correct.
So you go back to Councillor Galway.
Right, now back to the Councillor Galway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the comments. I don't disagree with most of what's said. The timescales are very challenging, and we knew that from the very offset when we were talking about, you know, nearly a year ago, getting this done in 2 years, and we're nearly halfway through that already, and there is much work to do, and the challenges are very big given the context of where we are in this authority, and it is incumbent upon me and others when we represent this authority that we put this authority's interests first, which is why we've put this alteration before us today, because there's some serious decisions got to be taken on this journey that will have a big effect on some of our services and the deliverability of the budget. And we have to remind ourselves all the way through this, the reason why we're all here as elected members, and I don't need to remind you, that it is to do our very best on behalf of the residents that we represent. As I say, we are committed to this unitary journey, and I was down in London yesterday talking to some of our MPs, and I had a meeting with a very senior official at the department, and I do put forward our concerns and reservations to them regularly, so I can assure you that that is happening. But it is a very challenging time. It's a challenging timescale. I'm not disagreeing with that at all, but we've got to stay focused on delivering our budget for the rest of this year, and of course delivering the budget next year, which we set what should be a balanced budget, but that is going to be a big challenge. So we've got to make sure that on this process we're doing the very best to look out for this authority and the services that it represents on behalf of our public. And on that note, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to present the report to Council.
Thank you. Does Council support?
What about a seconder?
I thought we'd had the second. We've had the second, yeah. Does Council support the paper as altered? All agreed? Nobody against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are you against it or not? You're against it, right. And there were 6 of you. Right.
Mr. Chairman, can we have a recorded vote, please?
Is there enough for a recorded vote? Sorry? You need 8, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry, there won't be a recorded vote.
We need 8 requesters. We need 8 requesters.
All right.
We've only had Councillor Griffiths request.
You need 8 requesters for a recorded vote?
Correct.
Right, you need 8 requesters for a recorded vote and you don't have 8.
It's Councillor Griffiths who's asking, Chair. It's Councillor Griffiths who's asking for a recorded vote.
Councillor Griffiths is?
Yes.
Right. So do you have 8? Do you have 8 supporters of a recorded vote? All those supporting that, please show.
Chair. No. So let's move on, Chair. They're not. Show of hands, Chair.
Right. There are not 8, so we're going to move on.
They want a show of hands vote, Chair.
Right. Okay. A show of hands then.
Chair, you
right.
haven't asked for extensions. Abstentions.
Abstentions.
Right. So we straight away go for asking.
So you ask all those in favour of the paper as altered? First?
Right. All those in favour of the paper as altered, show of hands, please. Right.
And then all those against?
All those against. Okay.
And any abstentions?
No abstentions? Yes, there is. 1. Okay.
So the vote. So the vote is carried.
The vote is carried. Right, we can move on then.
Yes.
So now it's B.
Yes.
Right. The budget meeting was simple compared with this. Right, item 5B. Over to you, Councillor Galway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As is the previous item, under Rule 15.8 of the Rules of Procedure, I would like to propose that we have another alteration, which is the same, but under procedure I need to read it out, I understand. So, since the publication of the papers, further information has been received regarding the proposed cost of delivering the unitary programme. Northamptonshire County Council has serious concerns about these figures, and until there has been robust scrutiny of the figures, that the County Council resolves not to agree to any further expenditure on the unitary delivery programme, as it may have serious implications on the deliverability of the 2019-20 budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. You have a seconder?
I am happy to second. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
You ask for the agreement of the
Right. Does the Council support that? Agreed. Thank you.
Now it goes back to Matt to
No,
propose.
back to the motion again. Over to you, Councillor Galway.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the proposal around local government reform in Northamptonshire, proposed joint committee for North Northamptonshire. And I don't have to remind everybody that obviously that involves the authorities, East Northamptonshire, Corby, Kettering and Wellingborough. So this is, the joint committees is the next stage of governance before the statutory order gets laid by Parliament. It is to be agreed locally between us, the authorities, and if you look through the paper, it talks about, again, representation, and it has been agreed that Northamptonshire County Council will have 3 seats, Borough Council of Wellingborough 3 seats, Corby Borough Council 3 seats, East Northamptonshire Council 3 seats, Kettering Borough Council 3 seats. So the paper talks about the delegation of some of the governments to the joint committee. And again, I refer back to my points around the finances and where we are with the services here. And we've got to be very careful to make sure decisions aren't taken that will adversely affect the services that we deliver here on behalf of the residents of the county that, of course, we represent. The paper is laid out and there's some draft terms of reference at the end which have been agreed to this point by all parties. So I don't think there's much more I need to say, Chair, other than I recommend this paper to Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder?
Yes, Chair, very happy to second that. I would just come back to the point previously about the finances and come back to Councillor Stamborough's point, is that the reason that this alteration has been put in is because, in fact, of the lack of information hitherto on both sides of the chamber, I think. So we intend to put that right.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Councillor Scrimshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't support this unless we have a commitment today from the leader that one of the 3 places from NCC will be given to the official opposition. I know the boroughs and districts are doing that. Of their 3 places, they're sending 2 from the administration, 1 from the opposition. And I appreciate that the paper talks about the proportionality, but to be honest, I'm not interested in political proportionality or what individual constitutions may say. This committee will be discussing things that have potentially have future changes for the way local government is done in Northamptonshire for decades. I think it's really important for us to get as many people around that table as possible from as many geographic locations, which is obviously covered by the different councils, but also from as many different people with different values, different experiences, and yes, different political points of views. We don't know the outcome of any future unitary election coming up next year, or indeed 4 years after that. I think this is a time to put the sort of red-blue politics aside and just get people around that table who are going to contribute to that new committee. Providing we can get that commitment today, I'm more than happy to support it. But I think this council should do exactly what the boroughs and districts are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you, Chair. And I would agree with Councillor Scrimshaw that it would be a good idea if this county were to send at least 1 opposition councillor to the committee as one of its 3. You notice I didn't specify the official opposition there. Anyway, on to the report itself. I just have one question, I think, which is around paragraph 8.1, which in its final section talks about the quorum of the new joint committee and specifies that the quorum should be 1/4 of the committee membership. That's 4. I think, yes. I think that's 4. And that there should be 1 councillor present from each of the 4 districts and boroughs, and 3 members from Northamptonshire County Council present. So if one of our members for some reason is unable to attend, there'll be no quorum and the committee can't go ahead. Is this correct? Do we really mean 3 representatives from the County Council in order to form a quorum? Or is that a mistake? Maybe that's something that's carried forward from the previous report when it was thought this County Council would have more representatives on the committee than it has at the moment. I think it would be useful to have that clarification. I did ask at Cabinet whether there were going to be any further changes to these reports and was told no, so I can only assume that that is accurate and that all 3 of our members will need to turn up for the committee to have a quorum.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 8.2 reads, given timescales, it is proposed that the agreement, that is to how to run the joint committee, will be produced by the monitoring officers of the councils. That's a very woolly phrase, but can I at the very least ask that the minutes of their discussions and their conclusions are made available to members so we have some idea of how the procedures by which these committees will work have been arrived at, please.
Thank you, Councillor Mercer. Councillor Stone.
Thank you. I'd like to support the proposal put forward by Councillor Scrimshaw. I think, given that this process has been imposed on us, it is our responsibility and our duty to make everything that is done as open, as transparent and as democratic as we can possibly make it. I think if we take the lessons from the overview and scrutiny process, then I think cross-party working right from the beginning is really, really essential to get the best we can possibly get. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eakins.
Thank you very much. I quite agree, actually, with my colleagues on the left here, is that we have to have a political proportion. Well, we do. At the moment, as it stands, there will be 10 Conservative members being represented, and there will also be 5 of the opposition members being represented. And by my calculations, that's a third. And by that counts is that we would qualify, more than qualify, for proportional representation and a political balance, as they say. However, it has been maybe alluded to is that the other members of the Joint Committee may be of mind to increase the NC's proportion to 5 seats. And if that's the case, we will still have the proportional balance. So although I understand that they wish to have a seat at the table, but I'm pretty sure that any representative that's appointed by NCC will give and work for the people of Northamptonshire via the NCC, and any political persuasions by other means, intended or unintended, will be unfounded.
Thank you, Councillor Eakins. No other speakers? No. Back to Councillor Galway.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did seek advice from the monitoring officer in terms of proportional political representation on the committees, and the County Council doesn't have to apply that, given that it is being cut in half. The other authorities represent the whole part of their areas, therefore it does apply. And I'm on Councillor Scrimshaw's point, I won't be changing that. It will continue to be Conservative representation on the Joint Committee as it stands, given the numbers and where we are in that respect. However, the next paper is about the working group, and I think they've got a key part to play, and we'll come on to that. And of course, that's where we're going to get a cross-party view of where we are in terms of helping to shape and inform the process as we move forward. There were some technicalities asked by Councillor Stamborough, and I'll perhaps ask the monitoring officer to either respond now or after the meeting. Yeah, okay, after I've finished speaking. So on the whole, I'm happy to present this paper to Council. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I invite the monitoring officer to answer Councillor Stamborough's question.
Councillor Stamborough, I may not have picked up all of your points, but on the question of the numbers of representatives to be a quorum, that is in fact a typing error, and I'm really sorry. We'll make that amendment. It should be one from the County Council and one from each of the other districts and boroughs. Thank you.
Right. Does the Council support the motion as altered with correction in paragraph 8.1? Agreed? Thank you.
So ask a show of hands for.
Those for, show your hands. Right, those against. Right.
And abstentions.
Abstention? 2, 3. Right, the motion is carried. We now go on to C. Councillor Galway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologise for reading this out again, but the same applies. So, since the publication of the papers, further information has been received regarding the proposed cost of delivering the unitary programme. Northamptonshire County Council has serious concerns about these figures, and until there has been robust scrutiny of the figures, that the County Council resolves not to agree to any further expenditure on the unitary delivery programme, as it may have serious implications on the deliverability of the 2019-20 budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder?
Yeah, happy to second, Chairman.
Thank you.
Now you get the approval of the meeting.
The council approve that?
There's no discussion before the
No discussion. There's no discussion on that particular part. Is it a point of order?
No.
Yeah, we're not in the debate
There's no discussion on that, apparently. That's what the...
To say we're on the alteration.
Yeah.
We're on the alteration. We're not on the debate.
Right, we're on the alteration, not the debate. You can speak on the debate when we come to it. The alteration, though, there's no discussion on.
Do you have...
So, do we have support of the alteration? Agreed. Thank you. Now back to Councillor Golby for the debate.
Thank you, Chair. So this
to
is
propose it. Yeah.
very similar to the last paper. Obviously, we're talking about West Northamptonshire, and we are all aware, I'm sure, but just to remind us, that involves Daventry District Council, Northampton Borough Council, South Northampton Council, and Northamptonshire County Council. The main material difference here is the number of seats that have been agreed, and that is 4 per authority. So that's the County Council 4, Daventry District 4, Northampton Borough Council 4, and South Northampton 4. The same comments apply, Chair, to the last paper, and I remain attached to the comments I made around the political representation as well. I recommend the paper to Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. You have a seconder?
Happy to second that, Chair, and the comments are the same as before, so I shan't repeat them.
Thank you very much. Right, Councillor McGee requested to speak first.
Thanks, Chair. What an opportunity for people to see in this chamber and outside of this chamber that your group is starting to change. And you missed that opportunity by being arrogant and not inviting opposition on that. And you'll throw them a switty on the next paper and say, oh, you can have a seat in that. You had a great opportunity. Instead, you remain the horrible, arrogant, nasty party. Prove to us you're wrong. Prove to us you're wrong and say this important issue, there's 3 seats there, we'll give 1 to the principal opposition. You've got an opportunity to do that, so do it.
They're not nasty, really. Councillor Stamborough.
Thank you, Chair. Same comments around the quorum, same typo in the same paragraph. Also, we're told, and Councillor Golby just confirmed it, that on this particular committee, the County Council will be allocated 4 seats, yet in the first item we debated, shall I make the point first, just in case it's the point you think I'm going to make? And then we'll come to it. In the first item we debated, we resolved to submit a, let's get this right, we resolved to submit to the government the recommended preference for a structural change order as set out in the appendices to this report, and the appendix regarding West Northamptonshire clearly says 6 seats for Northamptonshire County Council. Now, we've resolved to submit that. We have resolved to submit that unamended. Nobody said we need to change that. So I think you need to change this report so the County Council gets 6 seats on the committee for the West.
Oh, right. The monitoring officer will answer this.
Councillor Stanborough, the structural changes order is the document that governs the shadow committee and the development of the new authority. And these 2 papers that we're discussing now, 5B and C, are to do with the joint committee. So there will be different representation numbers on the 2. And that's the reason for the 6 in the one and 4 in the other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andy Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. My main comment is to repeat my request under 8.2 as before, so that we have a clear report to the members as to what the procedures will be and how they were arrived at for the operation of these two committees. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Monitoring Officer, would you like to answer that?
Councillor Mercer, the joint committee agreement will have to be agreed by each of the sovereign councils. So it will go through the normal sovereign council approval procedures before it gets agreed.
Okay, thank you. No more speakers? Back to you, Councillor Galway.
Thank you, Chair. I think the monitoring officer answered Councillor Stanborough's point in that they are two separate things, the joint committees, and the representation is different on the north and the west, and indeed it's different than what is being proposed to be put in the structural change order. So it does look different, obviously, because they are two different things. In terms of the political representation, again, I stand by what I said earlier. We do state in the papers that we would still prefer a greater representation from the county council, and if that did change, then I could certainly consider offering one of those places to the opposition group. But as it stands, I recommend the paper to Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does Council support the motion as altered with the correction in para 8.1? Can you show of hands, please? Those against? Those abstentions? Right, the motion is clearly carried. Now we go to 5D. Councillor Galway.
Thank you, Chair. I don't need to read the paragraph out on this one, but this is to establish a working group to inform members and get constructive input into the processes which we've already talked about this morning, the Joint Committee and the Shadow Executive. It is, as we all know, a critical point in the journey for NCC, and it's us as members have got that critical responsibility to make sure the services, the budgets and everything we've worked hard for over the last 12 months remain, and we carry on that path of recovery. Of course, we are moving forward. We'll be disaggregating the county council and aggregating the services of the districts and boroughs, and there'll be lots of very important decisions to consider and to take, and none more so than what we were talking about in terms of some of these proposals that were put before leaders and chief execs last week. I see the putting this committee forward will have a critical role in scrutinising the work of the Joint Committee and the Shadow Executive, if and when it is implemented. And that is where we will get the opposition across you know, the different flavours of opposition, as is outlined in some of the numbers that we've suggested here. So I think this is a good, healthy thing to do. We perhaps should have done it earlier, but we've had a hell of a lot on here. I'm sure we'll all agree with that. But I look forward to getting this underway. I think we should get on with it and get some meetings in as soon as possible with some terms of reference. And we've got to start and share and talk about, we've got the terms of reference at the back, I notice. We've got to share and talk about and deal with as members the massive issues that we're going to be dealing with. But I'm happy to present this and look forward to moving on with this, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Longley.
Yeah, happy to second that, Chair, and nothing to add to Councillor Galway's comments.
Okay. No members? Yes, there is a member. It's Councillor Stanborough.
Firstly, my apologies for misreading the report, so you can understand my confusion. I'm sure that the official opposition will be looking forward to receiving a member on the shadow board for the West when it's set up. Just a couple of questions on this one. It's referred to as a working group. I think it would be useful to have some confirmation that this working group will not count as one of the two working groups that the scrutiny function at this council is allowed to set up. I sincerely hope that's the case. And secondly, looking at the terms of reference, item 2, membership, refers to 18 members of the council, comprising the leader and 17 other councillors, yet the number of councillors to be appointed totals only 16. So I expect there'll be some amendments to the terms of reference that will be needed there to tidy that one up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Andy Mercer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This body will not be a scrutiny body in the terms of the legislation. For a start, it will have the leader in it, and by law, you cannot have the leader on a scrutiny committee. So this will not be a scrutiny working group. It will be a working group of the council, not of scrutiny.
Thank you, Councillor Messer. No more comments? Right. Are councillors happy this time with this report? We've got to go back to Matt first. I'm sure that.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to confirm that this is separate to the scrutiny working groups, as I see it, and we need to get our maths right in terms of when we put in these papers forward, and I apologise for that. But I'm pleased that we've got this before us, and we need to crack on with it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Can councillors please show with their hands if they support that? Right. Those against? Those abstentions? 2. Okay. Well, that is carried. Next we go to item 6, which is urgent business, a motion submitted by Councillor Adam Brown. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Absolutely delighted to rise to propose this motion, which is my first as a county councillor. And I'm standing in support of residents, primarily in my division in Blisworth and Milton Malta, but also in support of residents across a great many parts of our county, because the effects of the proposed strategic rail freight interchanges would have a ripple effect up the A45 towards Northampton and also southwards towards Towcester and down the A508 towards Milton Keynes, as I'm going to go on to explain. But essentially this motion is about us standing shoulder to shoulder with residents who, regardless of party political interest, regardless of their socio-economic background, in the villages that I represent, are absolutely united and almost unanimous in their opposition to these plans. And these are residents that will happily accept expansions to their villages, will happily accept sustainable development where a solid and credible argument is put forward. This is not NIMBYism. This is actually concern and advocacy on almost a professional level, despite the fact that the Stop Wroxhill and Stop Rail Central groups are comprised entirely of volunteers. These are residents who have worked tirelessly, absolutely tirelessly, over a great number of months to put forward wholly convincing and wholly credible arguments as to why these strategic rail freight interchanges are simply the wrong plans in the wrong places as far as they're concerned. And in addition to the motion that's before councillors, I'm just going to go over a few more key facts, namely that whilst the government has set out a desire to have a strategic rail freight interchange network, the government has not set the terms of the strategic network. It has left it up to developers to put forward plans and try and create an argument as to how those plans are somehow strategic. And looking at the strategic element of the argued strategic aspect of the two developments in question, both of them are only approximately 15 miles away from the Daventry International Rail Freight Terminal, which is due for significant expansion over the next few years, in itself creating higher demand on the rail network. Now, the Department for Transport has already said that it's not possible to accurately forecast the number of available freight paths on the West Coast Main Line. The plans, in terms of our perspective as a county council, run contrary to the West Northants Joint Core Strategy, as confirmed at Northampton Borough Council when they were consulted as part of the statutory consultation. The NBC Planning Committee said that the sites in question are unsuitable as strategic employment sites. And I believe part of that is because the two sites between them would actually concrete over more than 1,150 acres of agricultural land. This is at a time when we are trying to be more environmentally aware, more sustainable in our food production methods. And the proposals from the developers propose to actually take away swathes of agricultural land that could be far better used. Looking at the environmental aspect, on the A508 at the moment, there are 16,000 daily vehicle movements. If these two plans were to go ahead, that would add another 36,500 extra vehicle movements on sites that are already under immense pressure, particularly surrounding Junction 15, they are already subject to air quality management areas. So there are already sites that are highlighted as of particular environmental concern. Pollution in those areas is already high and a matter of concern for various bodies across the county. The effect of these,
1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. These two plans would only exacerbate those environmental concerns, in addition to the noise pollution, the light pollution from the proposed sites. And the very real concern of residents is that whilst they're put forward as strategic rail freight interchanges, we've seen in projects across the country that whilst the warehousing may go up very quickly, the rail freight interchanges, the railway connections, either arrive very, very slowly, very late in the day, or not at all. And so the risk is that we end up with huge swathes of warehousing in a part of our county that's almost at full employment, thereby creating extra demands on the roads to get the employees into the warehousing, and the whole strategic aspect of these plans falls down. So, the work that has gone into this from the Stop Wroxhill and Stop Rail Central movements is absolutely immense, which is why I've included in my motion my gratitude to those two groups, because I just think it's
Can you finish,
a fantastic
please?
example of peaceful protest, of residents coming together, standing up for the interests of their communities, and just in terms of the ripple effect across Northamptonshire, anyone who travels down the A45 towards Junction 15 at around 5 o'clock on a weekday will know the traffic congestion that's there already. That would only get worse. It will impact on the economic success of Northampton, and it will have a disastrous effect on residents generally. Sorry, Chairman.
That's all right. Do you have a seconder?
I would like to second the motion, and I would like to join Adam in his comments and facts, as I was involved with the local campaign groups from the start once the proposals were first aired. I would like to add that at no point I dispute that strategic rail freight interchanges have got a fantastic effect on the economy and helping its development. However, as a councillor, I'm very conscious that any development, especially of that nature and of that size, has to deliver some benefit for the local area and for the local residents. Hundreds of people will actually be affected in short, medium and long term. The process will be given green light to go ahead. As I said, being involved with the campaign groups and actually doing a very good research on the matter and understanding the scope of issues, I'm sure the intentions of developers are good. However, the terms of proposals are very shallow on the net benefits offered to the area. And of those familiar with Junction 15, the A508 and that side of South Northamptonshire would know how much pressure there is already applied to these roads. The infrastructure is barely coping with the amount of cars for the residential purpose, and we're talking about an additional vehicle movements of both HGV and the light vehicles. And there is no particular proposal from the development that there will be a sure or confirmed investment in infrastructure and further development. And even the bypass, which is part of the proposal, is not confirmed fully. It's in projection, which is not a must-do for developer if this goes ahead and if this will be given green light. Stop Wroxhill and Stop Rail Central actually campaigned, and they're voicing the residents' concerns, and I would hope the council members, both cross parties, not political really, be mindful to support the motion, as we all here really to protect wherever we are, the residents' use and put the residents' benefit first before any further development or any other issues. So I would be happy to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Sadigo. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add my support to Councillor Brown's motion. I wish to speak specifically on highways matters as it affects 3,000 people I represent on Grange Park, which members will know adjoins Junction 15 of the M1. At the moment, life is extremely difficult for residents of Grange Park to access Junction 15 of the M1, with the additional congestion which is likely to arise from these developments if they're given the green light, and with no proposals to alter Junction 15, material ones, the situation would become even more difficult for the 3,000 people who live there, many of whom commute, and that's why they live in Grange Park, up and down the motorway. I'd remind councillors there is only one exit from Grange Park onto Junction 15. There is no traffic light, so there are long tailbacks in the morning. If this proposal goes ahead on the basis of expansion, i.e. building these things before infrastructure, which is usually the case, then I see serious problems for the people of Grange Park. Amplifying the point that Councillor Brown made about congestion, we have a serious problem with, which is reported every morning to listeners with Radio Northampton will be familiar with it. It's the same report about the same stretch of road virtually every morning, junction 15 on the A508 and the A45. If these developments go ahead without material changes being made to that junction, again, that congestion will get even worse. So finally, Mr. Chairman, we need to pressurise Highways England to do something about junction 15. It is a seriously inadequate motorway junction. It was badly planned and badly executed, and it has very few friends. It is time that we got concrete proposals from Highways England as to how that junction would be altered, and long before any green light or possible green light is given to these developments. Finally, Mr. Chairman, what greets people when they come off junction 15 and welcome to Northampton? Nothing but litter. It's an absolute disgrace, the way that junction has been allowed to, and the surrounds. Northampton Borough is trying very hard to re-stimulate and rejuvenate interest in Northampton Borough. The first thing that people coming to Northampton see, coming off at junction 15, are mountains of litter. Mountains of litter on the roundabout, mountains of litter on the A45 as they come in. It's high time the District Council worked more closely with the County Council and got clearing up done right across the county. I'd speak just for this area, but it's a county-wide problem, and it doesn't receive the attention it should do. It's a disgrace to the county.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Gonzalez de Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd echo the comments of fellow colleagues. I have to say I do stand and support this particular paper and the urgency of addressing Junction 15 as our gateway, principal gateway to Northampton, the country's biggest town. I do support absolutely good quality employment and opportunities for our area, but I also do represent an area which is currently gridlocked on a morning and evening basis, and we are looking at some additional 3,000 new homes going into the area that will also impact on this. The proposed strategic rail infrastructure effectively is already there in the areas of Crick and beyond. We don't require this in our area here to support the rest of the United Kingdom's infrastructure requirements, and I have to say without any doubt it's quite clear that there are better locations for these sites. Put them into areas which are already constricted and do not have sufficient infrastructure in place and cannot permit that, because effectively there aren't spaces to do that, as we have communities already around that area, would be unreal and unrealistic to accommodate. Mr. Chairman, I also do feel very strongly about the pollution, the air pollution in the area, and I have to say that impacting this further by bringing in HGVs on a regular basis, it would be 24 hours, wherever we say it, and one can see already over 20 vehicles per night that make their residence very obvious in lay-bys, and unofficial stopping places really would just create further destruction to our area. I do not support these infrastructure elements to our area. The strategic nature of them is very welcomed, but not on those particular sites. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Baxter. Baker, rather. Baxter. Yeah, Baker.
An assumed name. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thoroughly support Councillor Brown's motion today. We have, in my dual hatter role, I don't normally mention that in this chamber, but I would like to say that South Northants Planning Committee have already done this. So let's not let them get away and leave us behind. On the A45, coming from the area that I come from, it's gridlocked every morning already. We are being threatened with 500 lorry movements a day from HS2 to a stone crushing plant halfway along the A45, which is in our area by the BP garage, if you know where that is, where they're going to bring lorries full of stone, crush it, and then take it away. We cannot allow this to happen. The amount of lorries that will be on those roads is absolutely undescribable, and we really need to put forward very strong measures to make sure this happens. And just as the last point to say that when I inquired into where the escape route was for any lorries that were going from this area up towards the M40, well, where do you think they're going? To Farthinghoe.
Oh, yes, that's good. Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to talk or criticise Councillor Clark. I think Yeah. Well, what I'm going to talk about is agricultural land and building on this land. We was told a few years ago by a Conservative minister that we got to supply more food for people because of our growing population. The other thing I'd like to mention here is something about global warming, which we've all heard. We've all seen what has happened in the last week in February. This warm weather that we've received in February is really unnatural for us to have this type of weather in February. And I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned for the farmers who are having to give up all this land because they have a tremendous job of trying to feed the nation. And I think we as councillors, really, we have to take on their mantle. The reason I would support this motion is because my grandson is a farmer, and obviously I have a lot of input into the farming community. I think what we have to do is to try to protect the farmland that we have. Because if we carry on reaching out to all these green spaces and building stuff on there, we're going to be in trouble because we're not going to be able to feed our nation. So all this farmland needs to be preserved. That's about all, Chair, I need to say, but I'm glad that this motion has been put forward to the Council, and I think if I could just offer a little bit of advice to the mover is to take it back to the residents and try to campaign more on the farmland and more on how we need to feed our nation rather than keep on building these big warehouses and things like that. I think it's an important issue, and I'm glad he's actually put that motion. As far as Junction 15, I agree, it is absolutely a nightmare, and I just hope that, you know, things can be sorted. Thank you for...
Thank you, Councillor Meredith. Councillor Stanborough.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the 16th of January 2018, a very long time ago, almost ancient history now, at a Cabinet meeting, the Northampton Gateway proposal was indeed the subject of some discussion by Cabinet on that date, and some of us went along then and raised concerns about it. So I'm really pleased that Councillor Brown has brought this motion forward, which we will support, because it's just not on to be building huge developments like this in what is basically a rural area. You might say, oh, well, it's very close to the M1 and all this stuff. Yes, but it's the other side of the M1 from Northampton. It's a rural area, and it ought to retain that characteristic. And to just plonk what could well be two developments in that area, it just really isn't on. So happy to support and hope that in passing this motion, that this Council's view is something that is listened to. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. I don't normally speak on matters that are exclusively in the west of the county, but I feel this is one that the whole council should be concerned about. What we're seeing here is an attempt to implement hub and spoke logistics systems. In other words, bring everything into one point, then split it all up and send it all out again. Doing it on a gross scale for the whole country at once. I don't think it makes economic sense for a start, because I think it's too big, and it will mean that the journey times will be longer than they need to be if you would have fewer smaller ones scattered around. But additional to that, the points of the local members are apposite. This is a rural area. The capacity of the roads is already at breaking point. You need to have new local infrastructure before you try doing something like this. You need to have more road capacity if you're going to throw all these extra lorries onto the local roads. That does not seem to be the philosophy of the central government over the last 30 years. It's always been, you get the development first and the infrastructure follows, except it never does. And you end up with situations like we have in the west and in the east, where you have gridlock every morning, cars crawling along at 4 miles per hour, polluting the atmosphere dramatically because they cannot move at their correct optimal design speed. If you have an overload of the traffic network, then the pollution levels don't just go up a little bit, they go up exponentially. So I feel that this is a correct motion. I don't think developments of this size are appropriate. If you're going to do a hub and spoke method, you need to have more hubs, not just one huge one in the middle. So I fully support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Mercer. That's all the speakers, so back to Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll just do the standard whistle-stop tour of people who have contributed. Fantastic comments from Councillor Sadigov, who I think what we saw from my comments, Councillor Sadigov's and Councillor Clark's, is that in the 9 minutes that we were allocated between us, you can barely scratch the surface of the issues that these proposals actually raise for the residents and for our county in general. So I'm grateful for all the comments contributed by Councillor Sadigov and Councillor Clark. Councillor Gonzalez de Savage is absolutely right about the gridlock that inflicts a very large area of the southwest of Northampton town as things stand, and the wider area, out beyond into the South Northampton District Council area. Councillor Baker was very adept at describing other related concerns that spring to mind, and it was an absolute pleasure to have 100% support from the Liberal Democrat group. I hope that continues into the future, but I doubt it. Councillor Meredith was spot on about the need to preserve agricultural land. Sustainability is a watchword both in food production and with environmental issues generally. And there is no way that these plans contribute towards sustainability in any way, shape or form. And whilst I think that the fantastic campaigners at Stop Roxhill and Stop Rail Central are probably already on top of the farmland issue, I will take Councillor Meredith's comments back to them and make sure that they're pushing those concerns as well. Councillor Andy Mercer is absolutely spot on in saying that these don't make economic sense for Northampton and Northamptonshire generally. I suspect that they do make economic sense for someone, otherwise they wouldn't be on the table, but I don't think it's the wider residents of Northamptonshire that these plans are seeking to serve. And I think, just speaking to every member in the chamber, Councillor Mercer made the point that we see these developments taking place, whether it's houses or commercial or industrial projects, and then the infrastructure doesn't follow. And I think that would be a theme that's familiar to absolutely every single member of this chamber. I doubt that there is a county council division that hasn't seen that issue crop up, the fact that extra strain is put on existing infrastructure and that strain isn't alleviated in any way, shape or form anytime soon. So I'm absolutely delighted that we seem to have the support of the chamber, and I hope that the motion will be carried.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Does Council support the motion? Can they do so by putting their hands up? Because it would be nice to tell government unanimous support. All right. Anybody against? Oh, nearly unanimous support. But thank you, most of you. That concludes. There are no exempt items. That concludes the business. Thank you for taking the time and trouble to come along to this meeting, to your County Council. See you again shortly.